Welcome back to those who are back, and if you're not, take your time. What a wild start to the year we've had already, 2021. Still find ourselves in a pandemic and still find ourselves with lots and lots of electoral chaos. And I think a good time to be looking at the intersection of Buddhist teachings and the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King as we come to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Day, and as the inauguration is looming over us. In these times, I feel really blessed that I'm part of a small morning Sangha. There's just 5 of us that meets every week, twice a week now, and we sit and one day of the week we sit and we just check in about our own practices. And another day of the week we sit and we discuss a reading that we've been going through together. And right now we're going through Thich Nhat Hanh's translation of the Heart Sutra. And the essence of the Heart Sutra is the Buddha's teachings on emptiness. And I love how Thich Nhat Hanh says that when we speak about emptiness, we have to ask the question, empty of what? Right? That if a cup is empty, it may be empty of water, but it's not empty of air. And even out in space, we think of space as empty, but it's certainly not empty of just cosmic dust. And as science has shown, that it's certainly not empty of dark matter. And so when we talk about emptiness, we have to talk about empty of what? And Thich Nhat Hanh teaches that when the Buddha talked about emptiness, he's talking about the reality that we are empty of a separate self, right? That we are all deeply, deeply interdependent. And in Thich Nhat Hanh's words, we are interbeing, we are inter-are with everything in the cosmos. That I would not be around if it weren't for my parents who gave me life, all of the food that I have eaten that has nourished me, the sunlight that gave nurturance to the food that I ate, and so on and so forth. And as I've been thinking about that interdependence, that interbeing, I've been meditating a lot using air as the kind of conduit for my understanding of interbeing. Because when we breathe, when we inhale, we literally, in a tangible way, we become that air, right? That when we breathe, air travels through our lungs, where oxygen is absorbed into our blood, and then that blood enters our heart, and the heart sends that blood throughout our entire body, where the oxygen is released into our cells, into our tissues, into our organs. And so the thing that is called oxygen that was just outside of my body, in the moment that I inhale, it becomes part of who I am. And we think of blood. I've been thinking about how, we think of blood as this like static thing, as just this like liquid, almost as if our bodies are like a sack or a bottle that's filled with this liquid that just stays there and it just remains. But in reality, blood is not only is it constantly moving, but it's constantly transforming, right? In one direction, it is sending oxygen throughout our entire bodies. And then it transforms and it now picks up the carbon dioxide that's in our bodies and moves that back into our lungs, where our lungs filter that out and we exhale that. Blood is a very active thing. And when we exhale, we don't exhale the same breath, right? I think that's another thing, that when we think of breath, we oftentimes think about it as we breathe in air, we breathe out air, and it's the same thing. It's just this thing called air that comes into our bodies and we release it back out of our bodies. But we know that we breathe in air, we absorb the oxygen, and then our bodies produce carbon dioxide as a result, and then we breathe out carbon dioxide. And so the air that we breathe in and the air that we breathe out is also very different. The carbon dioxide that was created in our bodies is released into the air through our exhale. And in the same way that we have absorbed the oxygen, and the thing that was in the air outside of our bodies is now part of our bodies, the thing that was part of our bodies, carbon dioxide, is now released into the air and becomes part of everything that is around us. And also, I'm only mainly able to become aware of this when I sit in longer retreats. But if you really are able to quiet your mind, you can notice that the air that you breathe out is slightly warmer oftentimes than the air that you breathe in, right? Because the energy that our bodies are constantly burning to keep our bodies at 98 or 99 degrees, whatever it is, that energy is something that is happening in my body. And yet when the air enters our body, that air absorbs some of our energy, literally, and it warms that air, and then we breathe it out. And that warmth, that was something that was in our bodies just a second ago, is now out there in the universe, in the cosmos. And so, when we think about it that way, like it makes me ask these questions of, like, what is the separation between I, myself, and air? And what is the separation between air and my houseplant that I'm looking at in my living room? And so that is one of the essential teachings of the Buddha and of the Heart Sutra, is of emptiness and interbeing. Many of you may have heard Thich Nhat Hanh talk about how he says, if you're a poet, you can look at this piece of paper and see that it is a cloud, because without clouds, there's no rain. And without rain, there are no trees. And without trees, there's no paper. So this paper is a cloud. And if you take that cloud away from this paper ceases to exist, right? And so I actually, before I move on, I want to invite everyone into the chat. Julio, if you can make sure that the chat is open to everyone. And I want to, we'll start with this paper. I'm going to hold up a couple items on the screen, and I just want you to enter into the chat. When you look at this paper, what else do you see? There's the clouds, there's the rain, there's the trees, there's the logger that cut down the trees, there's the food that sustained the logger, the ocean, the humans who labored, the paper mill, the microbes in the soil. Yeah, what about when you see this pear? What is in this pear? The sun, absolutely. Light, joy, the bees, a child's smile. I love that. What about this bell? What do you see in this bell? A river, earth, hope, minerals, mining, absolutely. I was at a retreat a while ago, a Vipassana retreat, and the Vipassana teacher, Essen Goenka, says oftentimes that the Buddha did not teach Buddhism. Right? The Buddha taught universal truths that emerge in all the great cultures and spiritual traditions of the world. And Mushim, our beloved teacher, who's on the call today, I was having dinner with Mushim years ago, and she said that there are Buddhists, and there are Christian Buddhists, and there are Muslim Buddhists, and there are atheist Buddhists. And I always think back to that. And when I think about Dr. King, I really think that Dr. King was one of those Christian Buddhists. But he was very deeply Christian. He was a Baptist minister, and the son of a minister, and the grandson of a minister, and a great-grandson of a minister. And through that Christian lens, he arrived at the same universal truth that the Buddha taught about interdependence. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, he wrote that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied by a single garment of destiny, that what affects one person directly affects all people indirectly. It sounds Buddhist-y, right? But it's not Buddhist-y. It's speaking to a universal truth that from a very different tradition, Dr. King also arrived at. And he expanded on that thought in a sermon that he gave on Christmas the year before he died. I'm just going to read some sections of that sermon. He says, it really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny that whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are made to live together because of the interrelated structure of reality. Did you ever stop to think that you can't leave for your job in the morning without being dependent on most of the world? You get up in the morning and go to the bathroom and reach over for the sponge, and that's handed to you by a Pacific Islander. You reach for a bar of soap, and that's given to you at the hands of a Frenchman. And then you go into the kitchen and drink your coffee for the morning, and that's poured into your cup by a South American. And maybe you want tea. That's poured into your cup by a Chinese. Or maybe you're desirous of having cocoa for breakfast, and that's poured into your cup by a West African. And then you reach over for your toast, and that's given to you at the hands of an English-speaking farmer, not to mention the baker. And before you finish eating breakfast in the morning, you've depended on more than half of the world. This is the way the universe is structured. This is its interrelated quality. We aren't going to have peace on earth until we recognize this basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. And so this teaching of emptiness and of interdependence, of interbeing, is a core teaching, not just of Buddhism, but of Dr. King's understanding of Christianity and Dr. King's understanding of nonviolence. And ultimately, we believe these to be universal truths, right? And a universal truth is like gravity is a universal truth. It doesn't matter if you believe in gravity, you're governed by its laws. And in my opinion, it doesn't matter if one believes in interbeing or not. It is a universal truth, and therefore we're governed by its laws. But so what? Like, what does any of this matter in practical terms? As we approach King Day, I want to remind us that Dr. King wasn't just someone who talked about loving all people. And he wasn't just this person who had a dream one night about Black children and white children holding hands in the playground and all getting along, right? There's a reason why the I Have a Dream speech is not only the most well-known speech, but oftentimes the only speech that anyone knows anything about. It's a beautiful speech. And it's also a very safe speech, right? Any white person can read that and say, oh, Martin Luther King was a wonderful man. And we forget how unpopular Dr. King was in his time, right? Because he was a rebel. He was a revolutionary, and his politics were very militant. Towards the end of his life, he was organizing the Poor People's Campaign. And as the core strategy of the Poor People's Campaign, he was calling on poor people of all races to come together to live in an encampment on the National Mall of Washington, D.C. And he said that they wanted to use that encampment as the hub of operations for a mass campaign of civil disobedience that would cripple the infrastructure of Washington, D.C. to demand billions of dollars in reparations from the federal government. And he said that he wanted to build a nonviolent movement that was as disruptive and as dislocative as a riot, right? Those were his words. So King he didn't speak just about love in that soft, sentimental sense. One of my favorite King quotes is when he says, power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. So King was a rebel, and we need to remember that. But the Buddha was also a rebel. Shortly after his enlightenment, the Buddha spoke of what is in the Pali language called Patisotagami, which translates to against the flow. And he talked about how the practice, Dharma practice, and the path of liberation is about going against the flow of what is easy, going against the flow of what may seem natural. That we're all born with this natural tendency to feel something pleasurable and say, I want more of that. And to feel something that we don't like and to say, oh, I don't want that anymore. I don't want to feel this. That is natural. But the path to liberation is about going against those natural tendencies of clinging and aversion. I think a lot of people here may know a little bit of my story, but when I was 17 years old, I was in a pretty lost place in my life, and both my spiritual awakening and my political awakening happening at the same time when I met a group of Japanese Buddhist monastics um, called Nippon Zammyo Hoji, and it's a Buddhist order that's really committed to nonviolence and social change work. And at the time, they were organizing a walking pilgrimage, and they were going to walk from Massachusetts down the coast of New Orleans, and then eventually touching on the Caribbean and Brazil and down the coast of Africa to retrace the slave route. It was a pilgrimage called the Interfaith Pilgrimage of the Middle Passage. And they were going to do this as a way to speak about and to really uncover the legacy that the Middle Passage had on this country and continues to have on this country, and as a spiritual journey of going from the United States back to Africa to begin the process of healing and reconciliation by reversing that pilgrimage or reversing that passage. Because they understood that the foundation of this country is genocide of indigenous peoples and enslavement of African peoples. And that is the path that was set hundreds of years ago, and the path that we continue to be on. Larry Ward, who's also an amazing Dharma teacher, just wrote a book called America's Racial Karma, where he talks about this a lot. That this is the racial karma of the United States. That is the river that we are on. That is the stream that we are on, right? And so what does it mean to practice patisotagami? What does it mean to practice going against the flow of white supremacy? Right? To cultivate compassion for all people when there's so much harm happening may feel unnatural. Like it may feel like an unnatural, may feel more natural, certainly oftentimes easier to hold on to anger and resentment and say, those people over there are the problem. And to remember that we are actually interdependent with that person may be an unnatural practice. It may go against the flow of the natural way that we want to be. But the Buddha and Dr. King were rebels that went against the flow. Right? Dr. King spoke about the three evils towards the end of his life, of militarism, of poverty and consumerism, and of racism. And I think that so much of what we understand as militarism, to me, is rooted in a deep, deep legacy of patriarchy. And poverty and consumerism is rooted in capitalism. And racism is founded on an ideology of white supremacy. And so I kind of like to look at as the updated version of the three evils of patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy. That is the river that we are all living in. And it's easy to just like float down the river and just go with the flow, and to never question patriarchy, to just become a consumer and not think about anything beyond what I can buy, and to never question our own racial conditioning. But that is not the path to liberation, right? The path to liberation is to go against the flow and to rebel against patriarchy, to rebel against capitalism, to rebel against white supremacy. And of course, these things are incredibly hard to do, particularly now because we are in such escalated times. The level of violence and destruction is so escalated. And an escalated level of violence requires us to have an escalated response. But I oftentimes talk about how I've noticed that the more we escalate our responses to conflict, and even in nonviolent movements, the more we tend to escalate our nonviolent tactics, the more we escalate binaries, the more we escalate us versus them thinking, the more we escalate othering. And those are the things that is at the heart of what is destroying this planet, right? And it makes sense from a biological perspective that when we are facing escalated conflict and when we are entering escalated situations, our bodies are flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. And one of the effects that has is it actually cuts off access to the part of our brain that is able to think about nuance, and everything becomes black and white. And again, from a survival mechanism standpoint, it makes sense, right? Well, like when your body is actually in danger, you don't have time to think about nuance. You have to look at something and immediately say that is dangerous or that is not dangerous. I'm going to fight or I'm going to run away. But the Buddha also taught us about non-duality, right? That like things are never this or that we don't live in a world of binaries. I have another friend who's a teacher of indigenous studies, and he says that binary, black, white, us versus them, right versus wrong, this versus that way of thinking is the most pervasive way that our minds have been colonized by the state. That if we look at any of our indigenous worldviews, it was never about a binary. And Dr. King also considered himself a Hegelian thinker. The German philosopher Hegel, who was really into dialectics, which was about arriving at the truth of a conflict by studying the truth of both opposing perspectives. The fact that King was considered himself a Hegelian thinker and looked at Hegel as one of his biggest influences is itself a great example of being a Hegelian thinker, because Hegel was not a kind person. Hegel was incredibly racist. But despite that, King was able to study Hegel's work and not to throw it all away by saying Hegel's racist, therefore I have nothing to learn from him, but to actually study Hegel's work and to pull the truth out of it and to leave the rest of it behind. But these things of like seeing the truth in an opposing perspective and seeing the nuance in all of these issues is incredibly difficult in escalated times, right? There's another beautiful quote that many of you probably know that comes from the Aboriginal people of Australia that says that that if you have come here to save me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound with mine, then we can walk together. And that quote I know is popular in a lot of social justice spaces. And I oftentimes question how many people really actually believe in that. Like, it's a nice thing to say, but do we really believe in that? Or do we only believe that our liberation is bound with the liberation of the people that we like? Right? Do we believe that we are interdependent only with people of the same political affiliation? Or is that a universal principle that we deeply believe applies to all life? And these things are incredibly difficult to sit with in such escalated, such polarized times. And I think another teaching and a practice that can help us, support us in these times is the practice of metta that comes from the Buddhist tradition. Metta translating to oftentimes loving kindness, but I've also heard Mushin, who's again on this call, talk about it as universal goodwill. And Dr. King also talked about agape, which is one of the Greek words for love. And agape is not like a love that you have for an individual person because you have all these shared experiences and you've had great times together and they love you back. But agape is this deep, sacred love that you have for someone because they exist, because you acknowledge that you are interdependent with them. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, hatred never ceases through hatred in this world. Through love alone they cease. This is an eternal law. Again, an eternal law. Doesn't matter if you believe it or not. It's a universal law like gravity that we are governed by. And similarly, Dr. King said, the darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And I just want to offer one more word that, as we speak about metta and as we speak about love, and as we are about to enter into a practice of trying to cultivate this universal goodwill for all beings, that quote from Dr. King, right? Power without love is reckless and abusive. and love without power is sentimental and anemic. And so I want to bring up another quote from an old nonviolent activist named Barbara Deming. And she wrote a long essay that has become well known in the nonviolent world. And she says about nonviolence, with one hand, we say to one who is angry, or to an oppressor, or to an unjust system, stop what you are doing. I refuse to honor the role you are choosing to play. I refuse to obey you. I refuse to cooperate with your demands. I refuse to build the walls and the bombs. I refuse to pay for the guns. With this hand, I will even interfere with the wrong you are doing. I want to disrupt the easy pattern of your life. But then the advocate of nonviolence raises the other hand. It is raised outstretched, maybe with love and sympathy, maybe not, but always outstretched. And with this hand, we say, I won't let go of you or cast you out of the human race. I have faith that you can make a better choice than you are making now, and I'll be here when you are ready. Like it or not, we are part of one another. And to me, that little snippet speaks again to this universal truth of non-duality and of dialectics, that the path to liberation is incredibly difficult, right? To go against the flow, to go against what is easy, to go against what everyone else is doing, right? Going against the flow, going upstream means not only that you're swimming against the water, but you're also swimming against all of the fish that are coming at you, right? And we know that most people in our society is going with the flow and going with what is easy and going with what everyone else is doing. And so what does it mean for us to go against the flow and to go against what is easy, to go against our own conditioning, our own internalized oppressions? And even for many of us who, it may be easy for us to come to a virtual meditation night, but it may be difficult for us to join a protest in the streets. And of course, for other people, it may be easy for us to hit the streets at a protest, but very difficult to sit in silence. And so what are the things that, the ways in which we're living our lives with the flow, that we're living in a way that is easy, in a way that is just part of our conditioning? And how do we rebel against that? Practice patisotagami, and to go against the flow of our own conditioning, to go against the flow of what is easy, because that is a path to liberation. And also not an easy thing to hold these like dual things of an assertive no, that being loving and cultivating metta doesn't mean that we love people so much that we're going to continue to let them cause harm. That if you actually truly love somebody, that you wouldn't let that person continue to cause harm, that accountability at its best is an act of love, and that we will create space for that person to be accountable, to cultivate that sense of accountability for themselves. And yet at the same time, as we stick out our hand and say, no, we are going to do everything in our power to stop you from causing harm, to reach out our other hand and say, I will never cast you out of this beloved community. That we will always cultivate metta and send metta your way and pray for your healing and for your accountability. And so I want to end the evening with a 10-minute metta practice, which many of you may be familiar with. We're not going to try to cultivate metta for the hardest person in our lives. This isn't going to be like a super challenging practice. But I do want to offer about 10 minutes of that in closing. But before we do that, I just want to open it up for about 10 minutes of just open discussion. I actually don't like the framing of questions and answers because you may have some of the answers and I certainly won't. So just want to pause here and open it up for any reflections. Or I was at a retreat once and the Reverend Angel Kildo Williams started her Q&A section by saying, okay, so who's got some answers? So yeah, just love to open it up and see if anyone has any reflections, questions, answers, thoughts. I wonder if you can share some examples of current day organizing efforts for social change that are examples of this non-binary love-based work. What inspires you? Just to put in a plug, at the East Point Peace Academy, we're going to shift all of our resources in the coming years into helping to launch this thing called the Yet to Be Named Network, which many of you may already be involved in some way. And it's creating small teams of people engaged in direct action at the intersection of racial healing and climate justice. And it's where we're really experimenting with this new training and this new ethos called fierce vulnerability, which looks at, what if we viewed nonviolent direct action as a modality for collective trauma healing? That what if we took everything we know about trauma healing and extrapolated it and imagine direct action as like trauma healing work happening in public spaces. So we're going to be doing a lot of trainings in that this coming year and a lot of experimentation in it. So you can check that out. Yeah, there's small pieces of it happening, and what we're hoping to do with the Yet to Be Named Network is to bring it all together. I was just part of a conversation yesterday with an organization called Braver Angels that is bringing people across the political aisle just to have one-on-one conversations. So on an interpersonal level, there are projects like that happening. There are places like Coming to the Table, which is bringing together descendants of African slaves and descendants of white slave owners to do reconciliation work. But my vision is to have that kind of ethos manifested in direct action spaces. And that's something that I don't see that often. I saw it a lot at places like Standing Rock, where the elders, made it very clear every time we went to town to do a direct action, the elders were like, remember that you're going to a ceremony, that direct action is ritual. And so those kinds of teachings really ground us in a different way of being. And a lot of the work that the Seguro Te Land Trust does here, the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. So there's groups doing that kind of work. Yeah, and Adrienne Marie Brown has a new book called We Will Not Cancel Us, which is very short. Really, really great book. How do we find out more about the Yet to Be Named Network? The Yet to Be Named Network doesn't have a name. We don't have a website. We don't have a Twitter. We're probably never going to have those things. We may at some point have like a very static website that just says, call this phone number. But we actually really want to prioritize relationships. So there's a little bit of information on East Point's website. But also East Point is just one of many organizations that are contributing to the launch of this network. So there's organizations and individuals around the country who are hosting little bits of information on their websites as well. thepeoplesinauguration.org, someone is posting. So how do you teach interdependence without being fueled by idealism? Great question. I wonder if someone has an answer or a response to that. Yeah, that's a great question. Let me sit with that. I think idealism is, there's a way in which the longer I do this work, the more I realize that the truth that we're trying to arrive at is like really cheesy and and really ideal. And I think part of it is we can't be afraid of that, right? That it's actually okay to imagine an ideal world and okay to imagine. There's Thich Nhat Hanh, I believe, says this too, that when slaves were on the Underground Railroad, they were looking to the North Star as their guide, and they knew that no matter how far they walked, they would never get to the North Star, but they were always walking in the direction of the North Star because they knew that as long as they kept walking in that direction, they would ultimately get to where they needed to go. And I think oftentimes idealism is like that. Like we should know that that's not the place that we're actually going to get to, but it's our North Star, that it's our guide, right? And in that way, there's that quote about like if you aim for the stars, you might hit the moon or something like that. And perhaps it's not a bad thing as long as we have some awareness that it's not the place that we actually are trying to go, or that we may not get there. So I just want to offer a few minutes of this metta practice, about 10 minutes or so. And so I want to invite everyone again to find a comfortable position, whether you're sitting or standing, even walking, laying down. And again, just settling into your body. And if you feel comfortable, you can go ahead and close your eyes again. And again, just bringing gentle awareness to our breath, to our bodies. Trying to feel the space between every single one of your vertebrae. And with each in-breath, trying to picture that space expanding a little bit. Perhaps picturing a string tied to the top of your head that's gently nudging you up towards the sky, creating more and more space in your body. And with each exhale, feeling the weight of your body against your cushion, against your chair, against the floor. Feeling the gravity of the earth hugging you closer and closer. And breathing into that expansiveness that is being created inside of your body with each and every breath. And we'll start this practice by thinking of a being that represents pure love for you. This may be a child, a parent or sibling, a close friend, an idol. Perhaps it's an animal or a forest. But think of a being that you have no challenge at all when you're with that being, being filled with joy, being filled with love. And imagine this being sitting right across from you right now. And really picture this being there. Picture how they're seated. What are they wearing? What expression is on their face? And try to allow yourself to notice what becomes present for you when you're aware of this being. Try to feel that love, that joy, that fun, kindness. All of those emotions that become present for you when you're with this being. Notice where you feel that in your body. And picture yourself gathering those emotions, gathering that energy inside of you into a ball. And that ball getting bigger and bigger inside of your body the longer you're with this being. And with each exhale, sharing some of that warmth, sharing some of that energy with this person, with this animal, with this plant life that's across from you. And notice if you see a shift in them. And as you continue to share this joy, this love, this kindness with this being, repeating in your mind if you'd like, may you be safe. May you always be protected from harm. May you find joy. May you find true happiness. May you find deep community. May you fulfill all of your potential and find belonging as a member of beloved community. Noticing in your body what it feels like to send out compassion, to send out metta, to send out agape. They say the scent of a rose stays in the hands of the giver, because giving something is also a gift that you give to yourself. So as we send out metta, also notice the reciprocity in the process of giving compassion, and noticing that ball of energy, that ball of warmth inside your body, not getting smaller as you send it out, but continuing to grow in the process. And as this image of this being begins to fade away, this time bringing into your mind's eye someone for whom you have neutral feelings for. Perhaps this is someone that you don't know that well, someone from work, a distant relative, someone from the news, someone who you don't have any particular positive or negative experiences with. Seeing if we can notice what it might feel like to send out metta to someone that we're not particularly close with. So picturing that person sitting in front of you, trying to picture the color of their hair, the shape of their eyes, the clothes that they're wearing. And acknowledging that even though you might not know them, that you are interdependent with this person, with this being, and sending goodwill to them, repeating in your mind, May you be safe. May you be protected from harm. May you find peace, true happiness, deep community. And may you fulfill your potential and find belonging as a member of our shared beloved community. Noticing what that was like for yourself. Continuing to breathe. Great expansiveness in your body. As we say goodbye to this being. And one more time. This time we'll invite someone who you may be in conflict with. We're not thinking of the worst person in our lives, not the person that has hurt us the most, but someone with whom you may have a little tension with. Perhaps it's a close friend with whom you hold a little bit of tension, or a family member with whom you may have a disagreement about something, or even a politician with whom you may have political differences. Most likely not our outgoing president, but someone that you really think you could sit across the aisle from and have a good conversation with. And try to picture that person sitting in front of you. And see if you can give yourself a little bit of space and bring in some curiosity. And ask yourself, what is going on for this person? What happened in their life that brought them to the point that created tension between the two of you? And see if that curiosity can give you enough spaciousness to perhaps send this person some kindness, some metta. And if you'd like, repeating in your mind as you look and observe this person in front of you, may you also be safe and protected from harm. May you find peace. May you find true happiness and deep community. May you find healing and fulfill your potential, and remember your belonging as a member of a beloved community. And again, noticing what that was like in your body. If you notice that energy, that ball of love, of compassion, did it shrink? Did it grow? Can you still access it? Knowing that the heart is a muscle, and like any other, the more we work it out, the stronger it gets. Knowing that this practice is just a small practice to help us build the capacity to truly embody metta, to truly embody the teachings of anatta, the teachings of interdependence, interbeing, to help us know that my own liberation is bound with the liberation of all life.